Hey everyone, hope you're doing great. Welcome back to my channel. In today's video, we'll dive into what if Deku was cursed with the Geass of Kings. Smash that subscribe button, and be sure to peek at the description below. Let's begin. The world was dust, and the taste of blood. Izuku Midoriya's universe had shrunk to the rough grit of the plaza floor against his cheek, and the agonizing symphony of his own shattered bones. Each ragged breath was a battle, a friction of broken ribs against raw lung tissue that sent waves of fire through his torso. One for all, the sacred torch passed to him by his idol, was a guttering candle flame against a hurricane. He had used it, pushed it, broken himself against the unyielding wall that was the Nomu, and it hadn't been enough. He could hear the fighting, but it was a distant, muffled affair, like a war being fought on the other side of a thick pane of glass. The frantic shouts of his classmates, the explosive crackle of Bakugo's quirk, the sharp, crystalline sounds of Todoroki's eyes. They were all echoes from a life he was no longer a part of. His focus, his entire reality, was defined by two terrifying anchors. The first was the sight of All Might. The symbol of peace, his mentor, the pillar of his world, was caught in the Nomu's brutal, inhuman grasp. The creature's fingers were dug deep into the hero's sides, forcing grunts of pure agony from a man Izuku had believed to be invincible. All Might's signature smile was gone, replaced by a grimace of strained effort, his muscles bulging as he fought a battle of sheer, attritional strength against a monster designed to be his superior. The creature's other hand was pulling at his head, its thumb pressing against his eye socket with sickening force. Each time All Might managed to land a blow, the Nomu's shock absorption quirk negated it, the impact rippling through its dark flesh with no visible effect. It was a stalemate, but one where All Might was bleeding, and the monster was not. The second anchor was far more personal. It was the hand wrapped around his face, 5 fingers splayed with deliberate, terrifying slowness. They were pale and thin, the skin dry and peeling around the knuckles. He could feel the chilling absence of the pinky finger, a small mercy that kept his face from dissolving into dust. The man attached to the hand, Tamura Shigaraki, leaned over him, his breathing a dry, wheezing sound through the dismembered hand he wore as a mask. A single, wild red eye stared down at him, burning with a mixture of childish glee and profound, unsettling hatred. "You see, kid?" Shigaraki's voice was a scratchy, grating thing. "This is the real world. There are no continues. No respawns. This is what happens when an NPC tries to be the main character." He chuckled, a sound like grinding stones. "All Might is being tenderized. Your friends are fighting grunts. And you're just a stepping stone, a tutorial boss I get to disintegrate to level up my reputation." Izuku tried to move, to summon even a flicker of one for All's emerald lightning. Nothing happened. His limbs were leaden, unresponsive. His energy was completely spent. All that was left was a deep, resonating ache and the cold, creeping tendrils of absolute despair. He had failed. The thought was a physical blow, heavier than any of the Nomu's punches. He had been given this incredible gift, this legacy of power, and he had failed to make a difference. All Might was going to die. Tsuyu and Mineta, who he had just saved, were still in danger. All of his friends were fighting for their lives. And he was here, broken and pinned, about to be turned to dust by a villain who spoke about life and death, as if it were a video game. "I'm sorry, All Might," he thought, a tear tracing a clean path through the grime on his cheek. "I'm so sorry." Shigaraki's thumb and forefinger tightened around his jaw. Game over, and then the world stopped. It wasn't a gradual slowing. It was an instantaneous, absolute cessation of everything. The roar of All Might's struggle vanished. The distant explosions fell silent. The dust motes hanging in the air froze in place, a static constellation of debris. Shigaraki's hand, inches from fully clamping down, was locked in place. The frantic, terrified beating of Izuku's own heart was gone. He wasn't breathing. He didn't need to. The color bled from the world, draining away until the entire USJ was rendered in stark monochrome. The only color left was the brilliant, visceral crimson of All Might's blood, which hung in the air like suspended rubies. It was a silent, gray photograph of his ultimate failure. Then, a voice, cool and melodic, cut through the profound silence. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once, echoing not in his ears, but directly within the confines of his skull. Is this the ending you desire? Izuku's consciousness, untethered from his broken body, swiveled. The physical world of the USJ seemed to blur and recede, the gray diorama dissolving into a formless, black void. He was floating, a disembodied point of awareness in an infinite emptiness. Before him, a figure materialized. She was a woman, seemingly no older than her late teens or early 20s, with impossibly long, lime green hair that cascaded down her back like a silken waterfall. She wore a strange, form-fitting white garment that looked like a restraint suit, with straps and buckles that served no discernible purpose. She was barefoot, and her posture was one of languid, almost bored indifference. Her golden eyes, however, held a chilling, ancient intelligence, and on her forehead, glowing with a soft, internal crimson light, was a sigil. It looked like a stylized bird in flight, its wings outstretched. She tilted her head, her gaze piercing the very core of his soul. You possess a power meant for kings, yet you lie in the dust like a peasant. You dream of saving everyone, yet you cannot even save yourself. A paradox, isn't it? Izuku had no mouth to speak, but his thoughts screamed. Who are you? What is this? What's happening? A faint ghost of a smile touched her lips. I am a witness. A ferryman. A witch, some have called me. My name is of no consequence. She gestured lazily at the fading image of the USJ, a gray ghost on the edge of the void. I am here because of your despair. Your absolute, unadulterated desperation. It is a potent force. It calls to those like me. Let me go. Izuku's thoughts were frantic. I have to help All Might. You cannot. The woman stated simply, her voice devoid of pity. Your body is broken. Your power is exhausted. In the world you left, you have approximately 3 seconds until that villain's quirk erases your existence. 5 seconds after that, All Might will be forced to overexert himself, exposing his injury. The Noma will exploit it. He will die. Your classmates will be next. This is the path you are on. The unchangeable flow of causality. Each word was a hammer blow to his spirit. It was everything his analytical mind had feared, laid bare by this strange, ethereal being. He was witnessing a prophecy of his own failure. But, she continued, and for the first time, a flicker of something akin to interest entered her tone. What if you could change it? What if you could force a new outcome? Izuku's spiraling panic focused on that single word. Change? The world is governed by rules, by the quirks people are born with, by the limits of their bodies and spirits. She explained, beginning to circle him slowly, her movements unnaturally smooth. But there are powers that exist outside of these rules. A power that does not come from genetics or evolution, but from a different source entirely. A power born of will, of desire. She stopped directly in front of him again, her golden eyes boring into his. I can grant you such a power. A power to make everyone bend to your will. The power of the king. With it you could command that villain to release you. You could command the monster to let your hero go. You could command them all to simply die. The world would become your chessboard, and its people your pieces. The offer hung in the silent void, monstrous and seductive. A power to make anyone obey? It sounded like a villain's quirk. Something Shigaraki would covet. Something All for One would possess. It felt wrong, unheroic. That's not what a hero does, he thought, a flicker of his core ideology pushing back against the temptation. A hero saves people with their own strength. They inspire them. They don't control them. The woman, Kasumi, as a name whispered into his mind, laughed. It was a soft, tinkling sound, yet utterly devoid of warmth. A noble sentiment. And where has it gotten you? Broken. Dying. About to watch everyone you admire perish. Your strength has failed. Your inspiration is a child's dream in a world of nightmares. She leaned closer, her face filling his incorporeal vision. The red sigil on her forehead seemed to pulse in time with a heartbeat that wasn't his. I am offering you a tool, Izuku Midoriya. Nothing more. A scalpel can be used to kill, or it can be used to perform surgery. The morality lies not in the tool, but in the hand of the wielder. You wish to save them, do you not? Is the method truly more important than the result? His resolve wavered. She was right. What good were his ideals if they died with him? What was the point of being a true hero if everyone he wanted to protect was gone? He saw All Might's pained face, Ida's determined expression, Uraraka's worried eyes. He saw them all being overwhelmed, falling one by one. And it would be his fault. Because he was too weak. Because he clung to a naive dream. What's the price? He asked, the thought heavy with resignation. A power like this didn't come for free. Kasumi's smile widened, a true, genuine smile this time, and it was the most terrifying thing he had ever seen. The price is your solitude. This power, Geass, will set you apart from all others. You will live a life different from that of ordinary humans. You will see the world through the eyes of a king, and a king is always alone on his throne. You will bear a burden no one can ever understand. They may call you a savior, but you will know the truth of your methods. It is a curse of isolation, solitude. He was already familiar with that. The quirkless boy on the playground. The inheritor of a secret he couldn't share. What was one more layer of loneliness, if it meant he could save them? Do you accept the contract? She asked, extending a pale, slender hand. Will you accept this power, this curse, and change your fate? He looked past her, at the frozen image of Shigaraki's hand, the symbol of his impending death. He looked at the specter of All Might, bleeding for a world that needed him. The choice was not a choice at all. It was an inevitability. His own incorporeal form mirrored her gesture, his spectral hand reaching out. He couldn't feel anything, yet he knew the moment they made contact. A jolt of glacial cold shot through his being, followed by an all-consuming fire. The woman's red sigil flared brilliantly, and an identical, searing pain erupted in his left eye. It felt as if a brand was being pressed directly onto his eyeball, burning a complex pattern into his very soul. He screamed, a silent, psychic shriek that echoed in the infinite black. Kasumi's voice was the last thing he heard in the void, a soft, almost pitying whisper. The contract is sealed. Now live, Izuku Midoriya. Live, and show me the world you will create with my Geass. The world slammed back into him with the force of a physical impact. Sound returned first, an overwhelming, cacophonous roar. All Might's strained cry, Bakugo's furious explosions, the grinding of rock, and the high-pitched, manic wheezing of Shigaraki right beside his ear. Smell followed, acrid smoke, ozone, the coppery tang of blood now sharp and nauseating on his tongue. Then came the pain. Not just the dull, throbbing agony of his broken bones, but a new, excruciating torment centered in his left eye. It was 1,000 burning needles, a molten brand that pulsed with a malevolent, crimson light. The world seen through that eye was distorted, washed in a faint, bloody hue. Game over, Shigaraki repeated, his voice snapping Izuku back to the horrifying present. His fingers were tightening, the pressure on his face increasing. Death was a fraction of a second away. Time, which had been frozen, was now moving at a terrifying speed. The memory of the woman, Kasumi, of the contract, felt like a distant, feverish dream. But the pain in his eye was undeniably real, a power to change fate. He didn't know how. He didn't know what to do. Panic, hot and primal, surged through him. He couldn't die. He couldn't let All Might die. He had to do something. Anything. He locked his gaze, his burning, agonizing left gaze, on the single red eye of Tamura Shigaraki visible through the hand mask. He didn't have the strength to speak, but his will, his entire being, focused into a singular, desperate, silent scream. A command born not of strategy, but of pure, terrified instinct. Get away from me! It wasn't a thought. It wasn't a wish. It was an order, imbued with an absolute, undeniable authority he had never known. For a breathtaking instant, the world seemed to warp around his vision. A glowing red sigil, the same bird-like symbol from the woman's forehead, flared to life in his left eye, superimposing itself over Shigaraki's form. And Shigaraki obeyed. His body, which had been leaning forward to apply pressure, suddenly and violently recoiled. It wasn't his own movement. It was a grotesque, puppet-like jerk, as if invisible strings had yanked him backward. He stumbled, his hand flying off Izuku's face, his posture completely broken. What? Shigaraki gasped, staring at his own hands in utter disbelief. He tried to step forward again, to lunge back at his prey, but his legs wouldn't respond. They were frozen, locked in a retreat they hadn't been ordered to make. What did you do? Why can't I? His confusion was absolute. His body had betrayed him, following a command that had not originated in his own brain. The internal conflict was so profound it left him completely vulnerable. That momentary distraction was all it took. Crack! A gunshot, clean and sharp, echoed through the plaza. A blotch of red appeared on Shigaraki's leg. He shrieked, a high-pitched, childish sound of pain and outrage. Crack! Crack! More shots. One hit his shoulder, another his arm. He scrambled back, his manic confidence shattered, replaced by panicked confusion. They're here! Kurojire's voice was a low, urgent warp of sound. Shigaraki Tamura, the pros are here! We must retreat! Izuku twisted his head, the movement sending daggers of pain through his neck. On the stairs at the entrance, standing tall and resolute, were the UA faculty. Snipe was in a crouch, his gun arm smoking. Cementos, Present Mike, and the others were moving in, but more importantly, Shigaraki's involuntary retreat had created an opening. With his master momentarily disabled and confused, the Noma's attention was divided, and for a hero like All Might, a single moment is an eternity. With a roar that shook the very foundations of the building, All Might broke the Noma's grip. He moved with a speed that defied his injuries, planting his feet and delivering a brutal punch not to the Noma's torso, but to the exposed, bird-like brain. The impact was sickening, a wet crunch that echoed louder than any explosion. The Noma was launched, a black missile of flesh and bone, smashing through the dome's ceiling and disappearing into the sky above. The immediate threat was gone. Kurojire, seeing the tide had turned irrevocably, swirled around the injured Shigaraki. It is over for now, his voice declared, as the dark mist began to envelop them. Shigaraki, clutching his bleeding wounds, stared back at Izuku. His visible eye was wide with a mixture of rage, pain, and a new, chilling emotion, fear. He didn't understand what had happened, what that look in the boy's eye had done to him. I'll kill you, he hissed, the threat lacking its earlier conviction. Next time. I will kill you! And then they were gone, warping away into nothingness. Silence descended upon the plaza, broken only by the panting of exhausted students and the pained gasps of All Might. For Izuku, the world began to swim. The adrenaline that had surged through him was gone, leaving a vacuum that was quickly filled by an ocean of pain. His broken bones screamed in protest. The dregs of One for All's power fizzled out, leaving his muscles feeling like shredded, overcooked meat. And his eye. His eye. The burning had subsided, but it was replaced by a throbbing, searing ache, as if the optic nerve itself had been set alight. The crimson tint in his vision faded, but a ghost of the sigil remained, a faint afterimage burned into his retina. He saw All Might, shrouded in steam as his muscle form began to fail, give him a weak, reassuring thumbs up. He saw Kirishima and Bakugo rushing towards them. He saw Tsuya helping Mineta out of the water. They were safe. Everyone was safe. He had done it. He had changed his fate. But it hadn't been his strength. It hadn't been One for All. It had been something else. Something cold, alien, and violating. He had reached into another person's mind and bent their body to his will. The memory of Shigaraki's confusion, the sheer terror of a man no longer in control of his own limbs, sent a wave of nausea through him. Was that heroic? The question was too big, too complex for his exhausted mind to process. The memory of the woman in the void, Kasumi, felt both intensely real and utterly impossible. Had he hallucinated it all? A dying dream? But the lingering ache in his eye, an ache that felt fundamentally different from any physical injury he had ever sustained, told him it was real. The contract was real. The power was real. The curse was real. His vision blurred, the edges darkening. The faces of his friends, of his hero, began to recede down a long, dark tunnel. The last thing he was aware of was the feeling of strong hands gently turning him over, and Aizawa's tired, worried voice. Midoriya! Hang in there, kid! Then, the darkness consumed him completely, and he knew no more. The first thing Izuku became aware of was the smell. It was a sterile, cloying scent of antiseptic and clean linen, a smell that had become uncomfortably familiar over the past year. He was in Recovery Girl's office. Of course he was. It was becoming his home away from home. A groan escaped his lips as he tried to sit up, but a wave of profound, bone-deep exhaustion washed over him, pinning him to the cot. It was the signature lethargy that followed a session with Recovery Girl's quirk, a full-body weariness that felt like he'd run a dozen marathons back-to-back. "Don't even think about it, dearie," a familiar voice chirped. "Your bones are all knitted back together, but your stamina is completely depleted. You pushed that quirk of yours far, far too much." Again, Recovery Girl bustled into his line of sight, her kind face etched with its usual blend of concern and exasperation. She held a tray with a glass of water and a handful of gummy vitamins. "The ligaments in your arms and legs were practically shredded, and you had multiple fractures. Honestly, if you keep treating your body like a disposable tool, there won't be enough of it left for me to fix." Izuku mumbled an apology, his throat dry and scratchy. He took the water gratefully, the cool liquid a balm on his raw throat, but as his senses slowly returned to him, he realized the familiar post-healing fatigue wasn't the only thing he was feeling. The dull, throbbing ache in his left eye was still there. It was different from the rest of the pain. The agony of his broken limbs had been a clean, sharp, physical sensation that was now fading into a dull memory. This was a deeper ache, a phantom pressure behind the eyeball itself, as if a foreign object had been embedded not in the socket, but in the very concept of his vision. He reached up a trembling hand and gently touched his eyelid. It was tender, but there was no swelling, no visible injury. "Something wrong with your eye?" Recovery Girl asked, her sharp gaze missing nothing. "I didn't see any external trauma, but there was some significant nerve inflammation around the optic chiasm. I healed it, but I figured it was just from the stress of the event." "You took quite a blow to the head." Izuku's blood ran cold. Nerve inflammation. It was a physical manifestation. It was real. The dream, the woman, the contract, it had all been terrifyingly, horrifyingly real. It's just a headache," he lied, the words tasting like ash. He forced his hand away from his face. "The light is a little bright," Recovery Girl hummed, unconvinced, but didn't press the issue. "Well, the police have already taken statements from the students who were able. They'll want to speak with you when you're up to it. For now, rest. Your classmates are safe. Aizawa and 13 will make full recoveries. And All Might." She paused, a rare softness in her voice. "He's resting too. You all did well. You survived." He should have felt relief. He should have been filled with a soaring sense of accomplishment. They had faced true, high-level villains and lived to tell the tale. All Might was safe, but all Izuku could feel was a cold, coiling dread in the pit of his stomach. He hadn't survived because he was strong. He had survived because he had cheated. The memory of the moment replayed in his mind, sharp and vivid. The crimson sigil flaring in his vision. The feeling of an ancient, immense power flowing through him, but not from him. And Shigaraki's reaction, the grotesque, involuntary recoil, the pure, unadulterated confusion of a man whose own body had betrayed him. He hadn't defeated Shigaraki. He had violated him. He had reached into the villain's mind and puppeteered his flesh. It wasn't a victory won with sweat and strategy, and the power of one for all. It was a win condition activated by a whispered command, a psychic loophole that felt utterly profane. It was the kind of power a villain would use. As Recovery Girl left him to his rest, Izuku closed his eyes, but sleep offered no escape. He saw the woman with the lime green hair, her golden eyes filled with an ancient, knowing amusement. Kasumi. The name echoed in the silence of his thoughts. He remembered her words, not as a dream, but as the terms of a contract he had willingly signed in blood and desperation. A power to make anyone bend to your will. The price is your solitude. A curse of isolation. He had accepted a curse. In his desperation to be a hero, he had accepted the power of a demon. 2 days later, Izuku was cleared to return to his classes. His body was mostly recovered, though a persistent weariness clung to him. The ache in his eye had subsided to a faint, constant pressure, a reminder of the secret now nesting behind his retina. He couldn't focus in class. Aizawa-sensei, wrapped head to toe in bandages like a mummy, stood at the podium, his voice muffled but firm. He was explaining the upcoming UA Sports Festival, an event that should have sent sparks of excitement and nervous energy through Izuku. It was the country's biggest stage, a chance to show the world, to show All Might, that he was here. But his mind wasn't on the festival. It was on his laptop, hidden beneath his desk, the screen dimmed to its lowest setting. He had spent every waking moment, since leaving the infirmary, in a frantic, desperate spiral of research. His search history was a testament to his mounting panic. Quirk mind control eye contact. Forced obedience quirk. Quirks that activate under extreme duress. Red bird symbol eye power. Permanent command quirk activation. The results were always the same. There were mind control quirks, of course. Shinso Hitoshi from General Studies was a known example. But his required a verbal response. Others required physical contact, or had temporary effects. None of them matched what he had experienced. None of them were described as an absolute, irresistible, one-time command activated by direct eye contact. None of them mentioned a burning pain or a glowing crimson sigil. He scoured quirk databases, conspiracy theory forums, and obscure hero blogs. He found nothing. It was as if the power didn't exist in this world, which, he bleakly realized, was exactly what Kasumi had told him. A power that does not come from genetics or evolution. He was alone with this. Utterly and completely alone. The bell signaling the end of the day shattered his concentration. As his classmates began to pack their bags, chattering excitedly about the sports festival, Izuku felt a wave of nausea. How could he even think about competing? How could he stand on a stage, facing an opponent, with this thing lurking inside him? What if he lost control? What if he got desperate, and it happened again? Midoriya, my friend! Ida's voice boomed as he chopped the air with a rigid hand. He, Uraraka, and several others had gathered around his desk. Your concentration today was admirable. You are already formulating strategies for the festival, I presume. An excellent display of proactive heroism. Oh yeah, something like that, Izuku stammered, quickly closing his laptop. Uraraka leaned forward, her round face crinkled with genuine concern. You okay, Deku-kun? You've been really quiet since we came back. You're not still hurting, are you? Her warm, brown eyes met his, and for a terrifying, heart-stopping second, he felt a flicker of the same cold energy he'd felt at the USJ. A phantom heat bloomed in his left eye. He flinched violently, yanking his gaze away and staring down at his desk, his heart hammering against his ribs. Don't look at them, a panicked voice screamed in his head. Don't look anyone in the eye. I'm fine, he said, his voice coming out sharper than he intended. Just tired. Still recovering, that's all. Uraraka recoiled slightly, a flash of hurt in her eyes before she masked it with a wobbly smile. Oh. Of course. Sorry. We should let you rest. She and the others backed away, leaving him in a bubble of self-imposed isolation. He felt terrible. He hadn't meant to snap at her. But the fear had been so primal, so overwhelming. What if he had accidentally commanded her? What would he have even said? Leave me alone? Stop worrying about me? The thought of his own selfish anxiety being forcibly imprinted onto her cheerful personality made him feel physically ill. This was the solitude Kasumi had spoken of. It wasn't just a secret. It was a wall, an invisible barrier of fear that would keep everyone at arm's length. Later that night, in the privacy of his empty home, he decided he couldn't live with the uncertainty. He had to know. He had to understand what the trigger was. He stood in front of the bathroom mirror, his reflection looking pale and haunted under the harsh fluorescent light. He stared into his own eyes, specifically his left eye. It looked perfectly normal, a deep green iris, a black pupil. There was no hint of the malevolent power within. He took a deep breath, his hands gripping the edges of the sink until his knuckles were white. He focused, trying to replicate the desperation he'd felt at the USJ. He pictured All Might in the Noma's grasp, Shigaraki's hand on his face. He channeled the fear, the powerlessness, the absolute will to survive and protect, and he issued a command to himself. A simple one. Raise your right hand. He stared, waiting. Nothing. He tried again, putting more force into the thought. Raise it! His reflection stared back, unmoving. There was no flash of red, no burning pain, no irresistible compulsion. There was nothing but his own strained face, beads of sweat trickling down his temples. He tried for nearly an hour, using different commands, trying to channel different emotions. He felt foolish, and then frustrated, and then terrified. The power wasn't a tool he could learn to wield. It was a wild, unpredictable force. It had a will of its own, or rather, it only responded to his will when it was at its most absolute, its most pure and undiluted. In that moment with Shigaraki, his desire for the villain to get away wasn't a strategy. It was the single, all-consuming reality of his universe. He couldn't replicate that state of mind. And that was, perhaps, the most terrifying discovery of all. He couldn't control its activation. Which meant it could happen at any time he was pushed to the brink. In a fight. In an argument. In a moment of panic, he slumped against the wall, sliding down to the cool tile floor. He was carrying a bomb, and he didn't know how to defuse it, or what might set it off. A quiet knock on his apartment door made him jump. "Young Midoriya? Are you in there?" "It's me, All Might." Izuku scrambled to his feet, his heart doing a frantic pitter-patter. He quickly splashed water on his face, trying to erase the look of sheer panic, and opened the door. Toshinori Yagi stood there in his skeletal form, looking even thinner and more haggard than usual. He was holding a plastic bag from a convenience store. "Brought you some katsudon," he said, offering a small, tired smile. "Thought you might not have had the energy to cook, All Might." You shouldn't have," Izuku stammered, letting him in. They sat in his small living room, the comforting aroma of pork cutlet and egg filling the space. For a few minutes, they ate in a companionable silence. But Izuku could feel his mentor's gaze on him. All Might wasn't just here to drop off dinner. "You've been distant, my boy," Toshinori said finally, setting his chopsticks down. "Ever since the USJ. I know it was a traumatic experience for everyone, but there's a different weight on you. A deeper one. You can talk to me, you know. Whatever it is, here it was. The perfect opening. The chance to confess, to share the impossible burden with the one person in the world he trusted implicitly." The words caught in his throat. How could he possibly explain it? "Sir, I think I made a deal with some kind of supernatural entity in a moment of suspended time, and she gave me a magic eye curse that forces people to obey me." He would sound insane. Delusional. It would shatter the already fragile trust All Might had placed in him. What if he thought Izuku was unstable? What if he thought he had made a mistake in choosing him as his successor? And what if he believed him? The burden All Might already carried was immense. He was a dying ember, desperately trying to keep the world lit while training his replacement. To add this to his plate, this knowledge that his successor was cursed with a villainous, uncontrollable power from an unknown source, seemed cruel beyond words. So he deflected. He chose the lie that was closest to the truth. "It's just seeing you, All Might," Izuku said, looking down at his bowl. "Seeing you bleeding, caught by that monster. I felt so useless. I have this amazing power you gave me, and I was just broken on the ground. If the other teachers hadn't shown up." He let his voice trail off, letting the genuine emotion of that memory mask the deeper secret. Toshinori's expression softened with sympathy and a hint of guilt. He reached across the table and placed a bony hand on Izuku's shoulder. "Ah, I understand," he said quietly. "Feeling powerless is the hero's greatest fear. But you were not useless, young Midoriya. You saved Azuri and Mineta. You analyzed the enemy. You bought precious time. You acted heroically. Do not ever doubt that." The praise felt like a physical blow. He hadn't been heroic, not at the end. He had used a dark, manipulative power to save himself. The seed of secrecy, planted in Recovery Girl's office, began to sprout, its thorny vines wrapping around his heart. He gave All Might a weak, watery smile. "Thank you, sir." The conversation shifted to the sports festival, to training regimens and the importance of making a name for himself. Izuku nodded and gave the right answers, but his mind was a million miles away. The wall between them, once non-existent, was now being built, brick by agonizing brick. That night, sleep was a deep, black, and dreamless ocean. But just before dawn, he was pulled under. He was no longer in his bedroom. He was standing in the center of the USJ Plaza, but it was different. The debris was gone. The dome above was a perfect, unbroken sheet of glass, and through it, a colossal blood-red moon bathed the entire facility in an eerie, crimson light. The air was still and cold. A fitting place for a rebirth, don't you think? Kasumi was there, perched delicately on the edge of the central fountain. She was just as he remembered, the lime green hair, the strange white suit, the indifferent golden eyes. You! Izuku gasped, taking a step back. You're real as the power in your eye, she said with a dismissive wave of her hand. I've been listening to your frantic thoughts. You have so many questions. It's tedious. What is this power? He demanded, his fear giving way to a surge of desperate anger. What did you do to me? I did what you asked, she replied, her voice flat. I gave you the power to change your fate. I gave you Geass. Geass? He repeated the unfamiliar word. It is the power of the king. A power that manifests a user's deepest desires. Your desire was to save others, to have the strength to impose your will for their protection, so your Geass became one of absolute obedience. A simple, yet potent, manifestation. But I can't control it, he protested. I tried. It won't work, Kasumi sighed, a sound of profound boredom. You misunderstand its nature. Geass is not a muscle to be flexed. It is a direct extension of your soul, your will. It responds only when your will is absolute, when your desire becomes a singular, focused command that eclipses all else. When you were facing death, your command, get away from me, was not a thought. It was an imperative. It was the only truth in your universe. When you stand before a mirror, you are merely curious. There is no conviction. No absolute will. The Geass remains dormant. Her explanation was chillingly logical. It meant the power was tied directly to his most desperate, life-or-death moments, the exact moments when his judgment would be most compromised. You said every command is a sacrifice, Izuku recalled, his voice trembling. What did you mean? For the first time, Kasumi's indifferent mask slipped. A flicker of something ancient and weary passed through her eyes. When you use your Geass, you are not simply making a suggestion. You are forcibly overriding a person's soul with a piece of your own will. You are erasing their nature and replacing it with your decree. The more you do it, she said, her voice dropping to a whisper, the more you will begin to see people not as individuals with hopes and dreams, but as objects. Tools. Pawns to be moved on a board. You will become detached, unable to form genuine connections, because your power reduces everyone to something you can potentially control. That is the solitude I promised. The curse of the king is that he can never truly know if he is loved or merely obeyed. Izuku felt a profound cold seep into his bones, a chill that had nothing to do with the dreamscape around him. He thought of his friends, of Uraraka's worried face, of Ada's earnest loyalty, of his mother's unconditional love. He thought of All Might's faith in him. The idea of that power poisoning those relationships, of him starting to see them as pieces to be manipulated for the greater good, was more terrifying than any villain. I won't use it, he declared, clenching his fists. I'll never use it again. I'll win with my own strength. With one for all. Kasumi gave him a pitying look. A noble vow. And an impossible one. The power is a part of you now, Izuku Midoriya. It is hungry. And it will grow. The red moon outside the dome seemed to pulse, and the ache in Izuku's eye flared into a sharp, stabbing pain. He cried out, clutching his face. What's happening? The power is settling in, Kasumi said, her voice sounding distant. Your control will slip. Soon you won't be able to turn it off. It will be permanently active. A single, unguarded glance will be enough to issue a command. You will become a walking curse. The pain intensified, and the dream world began to fracture. Kasumi's image flickered. A word of advice. Her voice echoed as the world dissolved into crimson static. Find a way to cover that eye. Be careful who you look at. Your gaze now carries the weight of a king's decree, and a king's burden is heavy indeed. Izuku awoke, with a choked gasp, tangled in his sweat-soaked sheets. The morning sun was streaming through his window, but the world felt darker than ever. He scrambled out of bed and rushed to the mirror. He stared at his reflection, his breathing ragged. His left eye looked normal. But he knew it was a lie. He knew what was lurking beneath the surface. A walking curse. The echo of the command he had given Shigaraki was no longer just a memory of the USJ. It was a premonition, a warning of the lonely, terrifying path that now stretched out before him, a path he would have to walk alone. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a tidal wave of sound that washed over the stadium and vibrated deep in Izuku's bones. 80,000 people, their voices unified into a single, thunderous entity, were screaming for blood, for glory, for the spectacle of the UA Sports Festival. For any other aspiring hero, this would be the pinnacle of their young lives, a crucible of opportunity where legends were forged. For Izuku, it felt like a guillotine. He stood amidst his classmates in the waiting tunnel, the air thick with nervous energy and the sense of ozone, sweat, and burned sugar. Kirishima was shadowboxing, his grin sharp and eager. Kaminari was bouncing on the balls of his feet, crackling with nervous electricity. Bakugo was a coiled spring of simmering rage, his crimson eyes fixed on the sliver of bright light at the end of the tunnel. Izuku, by contrast, felt like a ghost. His stomach was a tight, writhing knot of acid. His hands were clammy, and he kept them jammed in his pockets to hide their trembling. The source of his terror was not the competition, not the fear of failure, but the small, circular piece of plastic floating on his left eye. After Kasumi's warning, he had spent a frantic morning feigning an eye infection, rushing to a corner store optometrist to buy a pair of dark gray, opaque contact lenses. He'd claimed it was for a cosplay. The one he wore now had no prescription. Its sole purpose was to act as a shield, a physical barrier between his cursed gaze and the rest of the world. It dulled the colors he saw through that eye, casting a perpetual shadow over half his vision. It felt like a constant, physical reminder of the secret he was hiding. He lived in mortal fear of it slipping out of place. He worried that a strong gust of wind or a sudden impact could dislodge it, unleashing the Geass. Every conversation, every glance from a classmate, was a new exercise in terror. He'd become adept at avoiding direct eye contact, at looking at people's noses or chins, a social awkwardness that his peers mistook for his usual timid nature. "Are you ready for this, Midoriya?" Todoroki's calm, dual-toned voice cut through his panicked thoughts. The boy with the scar stood beside him, his expression as impassive as ever, yet his eyes held a flicker of intense, focused fire. "Todoroki-kun!" Izuku jumped. "Why yeah, I think so. I'm going to do my best." He made sure to look at the point where Todoroki's red and white hair met. Todoroki's gaze was unsettlingly direct. "I will be coming for you with everything I have. As the son of Endeavor, I have a duty to prove my own strength, separate from his. And you? All Might has his eye on you, doesn't he?" The statement, though phrased as a question, was a direct hit. Izuku's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you mean, don't play coy," Todoroki said, his voice dropping. "It's obvious. But know this, I will beat you." With that, he walked away, leaving Izuku with a new layer of anxiety. People were noticing his connection to All Might. The pressure was mounting from every direction. He had to prove he was worthy of One for All while wrestling a power that was the antithesis of everything All Might stood for. The first event, the obstacle race, was a blur of frantic action. Izuku managed to use his analytical mind and a desperate, controlled burst of One for All to secure first place, a victory that felt both exhilarating and terrifyingly hollow. He had won with his wits and his borrowed power, just as a hero should, but the entire time, he was acutely aware of the dormant curse in his eye, a sleeping dragon he was terrified of waking. Then came the second event, the cavalry battle. His team, Uraraka, Tokoemi, and the support corps student, Mei Hatsum, was a frantic, cobbled-together unit, united by the massive target on his back, the 10 million-point headband. The battle was chaos. They were swarmed from all sides, a frantic dance of explosions, acid, and tape. Hatsum's jetpack was their saving grace, launching them into the air and out of the immediate fray. But they were burning through fuel, and teams were adapting, using long-range attacks to try and knock them out of the sky. Below them, Bakugo's team was a whirlwind of destruction, cutting a swath through the competition. Todoroki's team was a glacier, calm and methodical, freezing entire sections of the arena and advancing with chilling efficiency. With less than a minute left on the clock, Todoroki made his move. A massive ramp of ice surged up from the ground, Ida's Recipro burst propelling their team up the slope at an impossible speed. They were on a collision course. "They're too fast!" Uraraka cried, her face pale with strain. Tokoimi's dark shadow shot out, trying to fend them off, but Kaminari unleashed a wide-arc discharge of electricity, forcing the shadow entity to recoil. They were exposed. Todoroki's hand, coated in a thick layer of frost, reached for the headband. Izuku leaned back desperately, the icy fingers just brushing his forehead. But in the same motion, Todoroki snatched one of their smaller headbands. They were still in the lead, but their flank was broken. As they landed, the jetpack sputtering, they were cornered. Bakugo's team was closing in from the left, Todoroki's from the right. The timer was ticking down. 30. 29. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Izuku's focus. He saw an opening, a momentary lapse in another team's defense. A boy from Class 1B, his face a mask of concentration, was focused entirely on Todoroki. He was within Izuku's line of sight. The temptation was a venomous whisper in the back of his mind. Just one look. One simple command. Drop your headbands. It's so easy. You could secure your place. You could protect your team's dream. His left eye began to ache, a familiar, phantom heat spreading behind the contact lens. He could feel the power stirring, responding to the growing desperation in his soul. It was a siren's call, promising a simple, clean victory in a situation that was rapidly spiraling out of control. He gritted his teeth, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. No, his hands, clenched into fists, shook with the strain of his resistance. I will not use it. I will win with my power. With our power. He had to. If he used Geass here, for something as trivial as a school competition, what would stop him from using it for something else? It was a slippery slope, and he could feel the abyss at the bottom calling to him. This was a battle, he realized, not just for points, but for his own soul. Uraraka-san! He yelled, forcing the dark thoughts away. On my signal, make us float! Tokoimi-kun, get ready to grab! We're going all in on one target. He focused the raw, crackling energy of one for all into his arm. This was his strength. This was the hero he wanted to be. He made it to the final tournament, but just barely. His desperate last-second gamble had paid off, but it had been a close thing. Now, he stood in the stark white waiting room, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. His first opponent was Shinso Hitoshi. He remembered Shinso's declaration of war from the cavalry battle. The boy from the general course had a powerful grudge against the hero course students. Izuku knew his quirk was some form of mind control, but the specifics were a mystery. All Might had warned him, say nothing. It should have been simple advice. But his mind was a maelstrom. The near use of Geass during the cavalry battle had left him shaken. He felt frayed, his mental defenses worn thin. He walked into the arena, the roar of the crowd deafening. Shinso stood opposite him, a lazy, confident smirk on his face. He had deep bags under his eyes, giving him a perpetually exhausted, almost predatory look. So you're the famous Midoriya. Shinso's voice was laced with a bored sort of condescension. The one who took first in the obstacle race. You hero course guys are so blessed, aren't you? Born with flashy, powerful quirks perfect for fighting. Izuku's mouth stayed firmly shut. He planted his feet, readying himself. Don't talk. Don't give him an opening. Shinso chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or are you just looking down on me because I'm from Gen Ed? Thinking I'm not even worth talking to? He sighed dramatically. I guess I can't blame you. That monkey-faced friend of yours from the obstacle race, what was his name? Ojiro? He just gave up his spot, said it was against his pride to advance when he couldn't remember how he did it. Stupid, isn't it? Throwing away a chance like this over something as pointless as pride. Izuku froze. A bolt of pure, unadulterated rage shot through him. Ojiro was his classmate. He was an honorable, hard-working person who believed in fair play, and this guy, this stranger, was mocking his integrity. He was calling his friend's pride pointless. The insult was a key turning a lock in his mind. The carefully constructed walls of silence shattered. "Don't you dare!" Izuku snarled, the words ripping out of his throat before he could stop them. "You have no right to talk about him like that. His pride is not..." Click, the world went white. Not the stark, empty void of his contract with Kasumi, but a thick, soupy fog that filled his consciousness. The roar of the crowd vanished. The sight of the arena disappeared. He was adrift, his body no longer his own. He could feel his limbs moving, but the commands were not his. He was turning, walking slowly towards the boundary line like a mindless automaton. Shinso's quirk, it activates when you answer him. The realization came too late. He was a puppet, and Shinso was pulling the strings. "Move!" He screamed at his own body. "Fight it!" But his limbs were locked, trapped in the iron grip of Shinso's brainwashing. He was going to walk out of bounds and lose. He was going to be disqualified because he couldn't control his own emotions. Despair, cold and familiar, began to creep in, and then, in the white fog of his mind, he saw them. They were like ghostly silhouettes, 8 figures standing in the mist. He couldn't make out their features, but he could feel their presence, their power. One of them, a tall, imposing figure, radiated an energy that was warm and familiar. All Might. The vestiges of One for All. They were here, a silent council within his soul. But there was another presence too. It was separate from them, a cold, sharp point of darkness in the warm glow of One for All. It felt alien, intrusive. A chilling sensation washed over him as he realized what it was. It was the Geass. Even in this state, trapped within his own mind, the curse was a part of him. And it was offering him a way out. "You have another power," a voice that was his but not his whispered in the fog. "A stronger one. You can break this." Just a simple command. "Look at him. You can see through your own eyes, even if you can't control your body. Find his gaze. Command him, let me go." The temptation was overwhelming. It was so simple. So logical. It was self-defense. Shinso was using mind control on him. Why not fight fire with fire? He could feel the power stirring in his left eye, a dormant volcano rumbling to life in response to his desperate plight. He almost gave in. The thought of freedom, of regaining control, was intoxicating. But then he saw the faces of the vestiges. They were faint, indistinct, but he could feel a palpable sense of rejection. A silent, unified disapproval of the alien power he was about to unleash. This cold, controlling force was not a part of their legacy. It was an impurity. A stain, and he thought of All Might. He thought of his smile, his unwavering belief in the strength of the human spirit. What would he think if he knew Izuku had resorted to a power like this? A power that didn't overcome, but dominated. No, the rejection was absolute. He would not become a person who used control to solve his problems. He would win with the power he had been given, the power he had sworn to master. He would win with his strength. He focused all of his will, all of his being, on the legacy flowing through his veins. He reached out to the ghostly figures, to the wellspring of power that was One for All. "Help me!" A surge of incredible energy, raw and untamed, answered his call. It felt like a bolt of lightning striking the base of his spine. It shot through his nervous system, a violent, overwhelming torrent of green energy. The shockwave of its passage was so powerful it blasted the fog from his mind. Boom! A concussive blast of wind erupted from Izuku, shattering the concrete beneath his feet. The force was so great it threw him back a step, breaking the trance-like walk. He stumbled, gasping, the world rushing back into sharp, painful focus. He had broken free. Shinso stared, his jaw slack with disbelief. How? Izuku didn't give him time to recover. He charged, flicking a finger and unleashing a controlled blast of air pressure that forced Shinso out of the ring. The match was over. He had won. But as the crowd cheered and Cementos declared him the victor, Izuku stood there, panting, his body trembling not from exertion, but from the war he had just fought within himself. He had almost used it. He had been a hair's breadth away from giving in. The victory felt fragile, tainted by the battle no one else had seen. His fight against Todoroki was different. It wasn't a battle against temptation, it was a battle of ideals. From the moment the match began, Izuku was on the defensive. Todoroki was a force of nature, unleashing glacial waves of ice, each one larger and faster than the last. Izuku was forced to shatter them one by one, using controlled flicks of one for all that sent shockwaves of agony through his already bruised and battered fingers. He could feel the temperature in the arena dropping. A layer of frost was creeping up Todoroki's right side, a physical manifestation of his refusal to use his father's flames. Izuku knew he was outmatched in terms of raw power and control. He couldn't win a direct confrontation. But this wasn't just a fight about winning. He could see the pain in Todoroki's eyes, the self-loathing that fueled his icy attacks. He was fighting with only half of himself, and it was destroying him. Everyone is giving it their all! Izuku screamed over the roar of another glacier, his voice raw with emotion as he shattered it with another broken finger. To win and get closer to their dream, to be the number one, and you're trying to win with just half your strength? You haven't put a single scratch on me, you know. So come at me with everything you've got. His words hit their mark. Todoroki's composure finally cracked. He roared in frustration, unleashing his largest ice attack yet, a mountain of jagged ice that threatened to consume the entire stage. Izuku met it head-on. He channeled one for all into his already broken finger, pouring every last ounce of his will into the blow. The resulting explosion was catastrophic. The shockwave tore through the stadium, and the pain that lanced up Izuku's arm was so immense it almost made him black out. Both of them were thrown back. Izuku's arm was a mangled purple mess. Todoroki was slammed against the back wall of the arena, his movements sluggish from the cold. He was at his limit. He looked at Izuku, his eyes filled with a storm of conflict and rage. Why? He rasped, his breath misting in the cold air. Why are you going so far? Because I want to be a hero who can live up to everyone's expectations. Izuku yelled, staggering to his feet. I want to be a hero with a smile on my face, who can save people. To do that, I have to be the number one. That's why I'm giving it my all. He saw a flicker in Todoroki's eyes. A memory. His mother, her gentle smile, telling him he could be whoever he wanted to be. But then it was gone, smothered by the cold shadow of his father. Todoroki's face hardened. He was shutting down again, retreating behind his wall of ice and defiance. He was about to give up on his fire, to accept defeat rather than use the power he hated. And in that moment, Izuku felt a surge of something new. It wasn't desperation to win. It wasn't the selfish panic he'd felt against Shinso. It was a profound, overwhelming, and absolute desire to save Todoroki from himself. He saw a tiny opening. As Todoroki stumbled, his gaze, full of turmoil, met Izuku's. The world seemed to slow. The ache in his left eye flared, but this time it wasn't a hot, panicked pain. It was a cool, focused intensity. The crimson sigil of the Geass bloomed in his vision, overlaying itself on Todoroki's conflicted face. He didn't need to shout. The command was not for the crowd, but for the boy's very soul. He whispered it, his voice barely audible over the wind. It's your power, not his. Don't deny who you are. The effect was instantaneous and explosive. It was as if a dam had broken inside Shoto Todoroki. The Geass command didn't just suggest, it compelled. It forcibly aligned his will with Izuku's, shattering the mental shackles he had placed on himself for a decade. The conflict in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sudden, shocking clarity. Whoosh! A pillar of incandescent flame erupted from Todoroki's left side, a roaring inferno that melted the entire mountain of ice in seconds. The sudden, violent shift in temperature sent a wave of superheated steam rolling through the stadium. The heat was so intense that even from the other side of the stage, Izuku could feel his uniform singeing. Todoroki stood in the center of the vortex of fire, his expression one of pure, unadulterated shock. He stared at his own left hand, wreathed in brilliant orange flames, as if seeing it for the first time. The compulsion from the Geass had forced the action, but the feeling, the power, the release, that was all his. A small, shaky smile touched his lips. "Thank you, Midoriya," he said, his voice filled with a newfound awe. Izuku felt a profound sense of triumph, but it was immediately soured by a chilling, hollow feeling in the pit of his stomach. He had done it. He had saved Todoroki. He had pushed him to accept himself, but he hadn't done it through inspiration alone. He hadn't won him over with words and spirit. He had reached into his mind and flipped a switch. He had forced the epiphany. He had manipulated his soul to achieve a heroic outcome. Was this what Kasumi meant? The scalpel that performed surgery? The result was good. Todoroki was freed from his mental prison. But the method felt like a profound violation. He didn't have time to dwell on it. With both of them readying their final, ultimate attacks, Izuku's full power smash against Todoroki's combined ice and fire, the battle had reached its climax. Cementos and Midnight intervened, erecting walls of concrete to contain the blast. The resulting explosion was apocalyptic. When the smoke cleared, Izuku was lying unconscious out of bounds, his body broken beyond anything Recovery Girl had seen before. Todoroki was still standing, just barely, victorious but shaken. Izuku had lost the match. But as he drifted into the blackness of unconsciousness, he knew he had won, and lost, a far more significant battle. He had used the Geass with heroic intent, and the terrifying, seductive feeling of that righteous, manipulative power scared him more than any broken bone ever could. The city of Hosu was a symphony of chaos, a discordant orchestra of screaming sirens, shattering glass, and the guttural, inhuman roars of the Noma. Flames licked at the night sky, painting the undersides of the smoke-clogged clouds in hellish hues of orange and red. This wasn't a coordinated villain attack. It was bedlam, a wave of mindless destruction unleashed upon an unsuspecting populace, and Izuku Midoriya was running right into the heart of it. His internship with the elderly hero Gran Torino had been a whirlwind of brutal, unorthodox training. He'd finally begun to grasp the true nature of One for All, learning to channel its power throughout his entire body in a constant, humming state he dubbed full cowling. For the first time, he felt a sense of control, a harmony with the awesome power gifted to him. He was faster, stronger, more agile. He was finally starting to feel like a hero. That feeling had evaporated the moment the Noma crashed through their train car. Now, instinct and a frantic text message from Ida were his only guides. Location info. That was it. No context, no explanation. But Izuku's analytical mind, coupled with a sinking, icy dread, had pieced it together instantly. Ida's older brother, the hero Ingenium, had been crippled by the hero killer, Stain, and tonight Stain had been spotted in Hosu. Ida was hunting for revenge. Izuku ricocheted off the side of a building, the green lightning of full cowling arcing around him, propelling him through the labyrinthine back alleys of the city. He ignored the larger battles, the clashes between pro-heroes and the monstrous Noma. His focus was singular, narrowed down to a pinpoint of desperate urgency. He had to find Ida. The alley he finally found him in was a dead end, a grimy, forgotten corner of the city. And it was a stage for a grim tableau. The pro-hero native was slumped against a dumpster, a deep, bleeding gash in his shoulder. He was conscious, but paralyzed, his eyes wide with terror. And in the center of the alley, pinned beneath the hero killer's boot, was Tenya Ida, his gleaming Ingenium armor scuffed and dented. A sword was pressed against his shoulder, its wicked tip an inch from his neck. And then there was Stain. He was exactly as the news reports had described him, a terrifying scarecrow of a man. His tattered red scarf whipped around him like clotted blood, and his face was a grotesque mask of raw muscle and sinew, his nose sheared off, his eyes wide and manic beneath a filthy headband. He radiated an aura of pure, unadulterated conviction, a chilling fanaticism that was more terrifying than any Noma's brute strength. "Both of you are weak." Stain's voice was a low, raspy growl, like stones grinding together. "You bear the title of hero, but you are fakes, driven by vanity and greed. You are the cancer that infects society, and I am the cure. Let them go!" Izuku yelled, his voice echoing in the narrow alley. He landed in a crouch at the entrance, the green energy of full cowling flickering around him. Stain's head snapped towards him, his serpentine tongue flicking out to lick at the blood on his blade. "Another one?" The children are out in force tonight. You have the eyes of a true hero, boy, full of purpose. But you are interfering. This has nothing to do with you. Leave now, or face the purge. I can't do that, Izuku said, his heart hammering against his ribs. The fear was a cold, solid lump in his throat, but he pushed it down. When you meddle in other people's affairs, that's one of the basic tenets of being a hero. He launched himself forward, a green blur of motion. Smash! He feinted a punch, forcing Stain to dodge, creating an opening for him to grab Ida and Native. But the hero killer was impossibly fast. He sidestepped the feint, his movements economical and deadly, and his blades sliced through the air. Izuku had to twist midair to avoid being gutted, the sharp edge of the katana leaving a shallow cut along his arm. It was a mistake. He knew it the instant it happened. Stain brought the blade to his mouth and licked the fresh trail of Izuku's blood. Immediately Izuku's body locked up. The humming energy of full cowling sputtered and died. He fell from the air like a stone, crashing onto the grimy pavement, his limbs completely unresponsive. It felt like the worst kind of sleep paralysis. His mind was screaming commands, but his body was a useless prison of flesh and bone. Stain's quirk, bloodcurdle. By ingesting a person's blood, he could paralyze them. The duration depended on their blood type. A valiant effort, but a foolish one. Stain rasped, slowly advancing on him. Your spirit is genuine, but your skills are unrefined. You are not yet worthy of the name hero. But you have potential. Unlike these two, he turned his attention back to Ida. You, child in armor. You are the worst of them all. You don't seek justice. You don't strive to save others. You are a slave to your own hatred. You hunt me not as a hero, but as an avenger. And those who use their power for their own selfish desires are the furthest from what a hero should be. He raised his sword, its tip aimed at Ida's exposed neck. And for that you must die. Stop! Ida choked out, tears of frustration and rage streaming down his face. This is my right. He took my brother's future. I will take his life. No! Izuku screamed, his voice the only part of him he could control. He strained against the paralysis, every muscle fiber screaming in protest. It was useless. He was just as helpless as he had been at the USJ, a spectator to a tragedy he was powerless to prevent. He was going to watch his friend be murdered right in front of him. Despair, black and absolute, flooded his senses. The world seemed to narrow, his entire existence focused on the gleaming tip of Stain's katana as it began its descent. He needed more power. He needed to save him. He needed to make him stop. That thought, that desperate, all-consuming need, was the key. The familiar, phantom heat ignited in his left eye. It was no longer a dull ache but a searing, white-hot brand. Through the opaque contact lens he still wore, the world took on a faint, bloody nimbus. The dormant power of Geass, awakened by his absolute, singular will to protect his friend, roared to life. He didn't know Stain's blood type. He didn't know how long the paralysis would last. It could be minutes. But Ida only had seconds. There was no time for one for all. There was no time for a conventional fight. There was only the curse. He had sworn to himself he would never use it again. After the sports festival, he had been terrified of it, of the cold, hollow victory it had given him. He had fought to keep it chained, to rely on his own strength. But Kasumi's words echoed in his mind, a ghostly whisper from a dreamlike memory. Is the method truly more important than the result? Here, in this filthy alley, with his friend's life hanging by a thread, the answer was a resounding, soul-shattering no. He strained his neck, forcing his head up just enough to see. Stain was looking down at Ida, savoring the kill, but for a fraction of a second, as he adjusted his grip on the sword, his manic gaze flickered towards Izuku, meeting his. It was all the opening he needed. The world warped. The crimson, bird-like sigil of the Geass flared into existence in his vision, so bright it felt like it was burning through the contact lens. It superimposed itself over the hero killer's form, a brand of absolute authority. Izuku didn't scream. He didn't shout. He poured all of his will, all of his heroic conviction, all of his desperate hope into a single, potent, world-altering command. He spoke it into the very fiber of Stain's being. live, and dedicate your life to atoning for your sins. The command was not a simple stop. It was not a let him go. It was deeper. It was a complete and total rewriting of the man's fanatical ideology. It was an attempt, born of desperation, to use this cursed power not just to neutralize, but to save. To force salvation upon a man who didn't want it. Stain froze. His sword, a mere millimeter from Ida's skin, stopped dead. His entire body went rigid, his muscles locked in a state of violent conflict. His arm trembled, the blade vibrating with the force of his own will warring against the absolute, irresistible command now embedded in his soul. His ideology, the fanatical creed that had driven him to murder over a dozen heroes and cripple countless more, was the bedrock of his existence. It was everything he was. And now, an alien will, an undeniable law from an outside god, had been slammed down on top of it, declaring it null and void. What? Stain's voice was a choked, confused gurgle. He stared at his own hand, at the sword he could no longer bring down. The command to live directly contradicted his self-destructive, sacrificial path. The command to atone was a complete refutation of his belief that his actions were righteous. He was paralyzed, not by his own quirk, but by a catastrophic paradox in his own mind. He was a man whose body and soul had just been given two diametrically opposed, absolute orders. Suddenly, a wall of brilliant orange flame roared into the alley, followed by a wave of sharp, glistening ice. Midoriya! Are you okay? Shoto Todoroki had arrived. He slid into the alley on a ramp of his own ice, his expression grim and focused. He had received Izuku's frantic, one-word location share and had come running. He took in the scene in an instant, Native and Ida on the ground, Izuku paralyzed and struggling, and the hero killer standing over them, frozen like a statue in mid-strike. Todoroki-kun! Izuku gasped, relief and profound guilt warring within him. Stain's head twitched, his manic eyes finding Todoroki. The sight of another fake hero seemed to momentarily override the Geass's hold. With a guttural roar, he broke his stasis, not to attack Ida, but to throw a knife at Todoroki. The knife spun through the air, but just as it left his hand, Izuku felt the paralysis of blood-curdle finally wear off. The feeling returned to his limbs in a pins and needles rush. He exploded into motion. Todoroki, look out! He launched himself forward, the green lightning of full cowling encasing him. He tackled Todoroki, pushing them both out of the knife's path. It clattered harmlessly against the brick wall behind them. The fight was back on, but the dynamic had shifted completely. Stain was not the same fighter he had been moments before. He was erratic, his movements sloppy. He would lunge, then hesitate. He would raise his sword, then his arm would lock up, trembling. The Geass command was still tearing him apart from the inside. What's wrong with him? Todoroki asked, sending a wave of ice to pin Stain's leg. He seems confused. I don't know. Izuku lied, the words feeling heavy and false on his tongue. He couldn't explain. He couldn't tell Todoroki that he had just performed a psychic lobotomy on their opponent. He and Todoroki fell into a rhythm, a coordinated dance of fire, ice, and lightning-fast strikes. Izuku's full cowling allowed him to dart in and out, landing powerful blows, while Todoroki provided long-range support and defense. Ida, seeing his friends fighting for him, finally broke through his own paralysis of hatred and despair, rejoining the fight with his powerful kicks. Stain was overwhelmed. He was a master of combat, a predator who thrived on exploiting his opponent's weaknesses. But he couldn't fight them and himself at the same time. The internal war was taking its toll. Finally, with a combined reciprocal burst from Ida and a full-power Delaware smash from Izuku, the hero killer was knocked unconscious, his battered body slumping against the alley wall. It was over. The silence that followed was heavy, broken only by their ragged breathing. They had done it. They had faced the infamous hero killer and won. But as Izuku looked at the unconscious form of Kaizo Makaguro, he felt no triumph. He felt a deep, chilling sense of horror at what he had done. He hadn't defeated Stain with strength and heroism. He hadn't overpowered his will with his own. He had cheated. He had reached into the man's very soul and rewritten his fundamental principles. He had won, but he had done so by stripping his enemy of the one thing every person possessed: their own free will. He hadn't just stopped a killer, he had unmade a man. The act felt profoundly, cosmically wrong. It was a violation on a level that transcended physical violence. Todoroki knelt beside him, his hand resting on Izuku's shoulder. He looked from the unconscious villain to Izuku's pale, sweat-drenched face. "Midoriya," he said, his voice low and serious. "When I arrived, for a second, Stain was completely frozen. He wasn't just standing still, it was like he couldn't move. And you, the look in your eye, it was just for an instant, before you tackled me. It was different." Izuku flinched, pulling away slightly. "I was just paralyzed." From his quirk, Todoroki's mismatched eyes narrowed. He was observant, analytical. He knew something didn't add up. The way he's been fighting since, it's not just about us being a tough match. He's fighting like he's forgotten how. Like he's arguing with himself over every move. He paused, his gaze piercing. "Something happened in this alley before I got here. Something more than just a fight." Izuku couldn't meet his gaze. The lie was a physical weight, pressing down on him, suffocating him. He had saved his friend, but he had deepened the chasm of solitude around himself. The arrival of Gran Torino and other pro-heroes broke the tense silence. As they began to secure Stain and tend to the wounded, Izuku felt a wave of dizziness. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the bone-deep exhaustion of One for All, the sting of his cuts, and the heavy, sickening burden of his cursed victory. They strapped Stain to a makeshift gurney. But as they were about to move him, a winged gnome swooped down from the sky, its talons extended, grabbing Izuku and lifting him into the air. Panic erupted. The pros were too far away to react. Izuku struggled, but the creature's grip was like iron, and then, something impossible happened. Stain's eyes snapped open. They were bloodshot, wild, and filled with a terrifying, fractured light. With a roar that was pure, animalistic rage, he broke the restraints holding him down. He moved with a sudden, shocking burst of speed, licking the blood off a scrape on the ground to activate his quirk on the Noma. The winged creature froze in the air and came crashing down. Stain caught Izuku, setting him on his feet before turning to face the paralyzed monster. He drove his knife deep into the Noma's exposed brain, killing it instantly. He stood over the dead creature, a terrifying silhouette against the burning city. A rib, broken in their fight, had punctured his lung, and he was coughing up blood. But his presence was immense, overwhelming. Every pro-hero, even Endeavor who had just arrived, was frozen in place by the sheer, terrifying force of his will. But it wasn't the same will as before. The fanatical conviction was still there, but it was twisted, warped by the Geass command still raging within him. "You are all fakes!" he bellowed, his voice a raw, agonizing sound. The only one who is worthy, is All Might. He is a true hero." He took a stumbling step forward, his bloody knife held high. But then the command, the impossible paradox Izuku had inflicted upon him, reasserted its dominance. His body convulsed. Live, atone, purge the fakes. The conflicting directives tore him apart. His eyes rolled back in his head, and he collapsed, unconscious once more. The last thing to fall was his tattered headband, revealing the face of a man utterly broken, not by fists, but by a single, whispered command. The heroes stared in stunned silence. They saw a villain who had, for a moment, acted like a hero, saving the very boy who had helped defeat him. They saw his indomitable spirit. Izuku saw something else. He saw the horrific results of his power. He had intended to save Stain, to force him onto a path of atonement. But he hadn't created a penitent man. He had created a monster at war with itself, a fractured soul whose original ideology was so strong that even the absolute power of Geass could not erase it, only conflict with it, driving him to madness. As the paramedics rushed forward and his friends gathered around him, their faces a mixture of awe and concern, Izuku felt a cold, desolate certainty settle in his heart. This power was not a scalpel. It was a hammer. And he had just used it to shatter a man's soul. He had saved Ida's life, but he was terrified he had just damned his own. The dust of Hoso had settled, but the ghosts of that night lingered, long shadows stretching into Izuku's daily life. The official story was a fabrication of heroism and necessity. Endeavor had defeated the hero killer, with Midoriya, Ida, and Todoroki playing minor, unsanctioned roles. They were reprimanded for their recklessness and praised in secret for their bravery. Ida had found a measure of peace, his quest for revenge sublimated into a genuine desire to embody the heroic ideals his brother stood for. Todoroki was slowly, cautiously, beginning to integrate his fire, his relationship with his father still fraught with tension but no longer defined by absolute rejection. For Izuku, however, there was no peace. There was only the cold, constant hum of fear. The Geass was changing. It was no longer a dormant volcano, waiting for a moment of absolute desperation to erupt. It was a low-grade fever, a persistent, thrumming presence behind his left eye. Kasumi's prophecy was coming true. The power was growing, settling into his soul, and his control was fraying at the edges. The most terrifying manifestation was the permanence. The crimson sigil, once a fleeting flash in moments of extreme duress, was now a constant. He awoke one morning, stumbled to the bathroom mirror, and froze in horror. There, swirling in the green depths of his left iris, was the faint but unmistakable outline of the bird-like sigil. It wasn't glowing, not yet, but it was there, etched into his eye like a supernatural cataract. Panic, stark and absolute, seized him. He fumbled with his contact lens case, his hands shaking so badly it took 3 tries to get the small, gray disc into his eye. The opaque shield hid the evidence, but it didn't negate the truth. The curse was no longer just a potential threat, it was a visible, physical part of him. He was a walking curse. This new reality changed everything. It transformed every casual interaction into a high-stakes game of avoidance. He could no longer afford a moment of carelessness. A slip of the contact lens, a direct, emotionally charged look into a friend's eyes, could have catastrophic consequences. He began to live his life on a knife's edge, perpetually on guard against himself. He became a master of evasion. In class, he sat slightly hunched, his gaze fixed on his desk or the chalkboard. In the hallways, he kept his head down, offering mumbled greetings to the floor. During lunch in the bustling cafeteria, he would find the most isolated corner, his back to the wall, so no one could catch him by surprise. His friends, of course, noticed the change. "Deku-kun, are you feeling all right?" Uraraka asked one afternoon as they walked back to the newly established dorms of Heights Alliance. Her brow was furrowed with the same genuine concern that he now found so terrifying. "You've been really distant. Even more than after the USJ. Is your injury from Hostess still bothering you?" "I'm fine, Uraraka-san," he said, his voice a little too loud, a little too cheerful. He quickened his pace, forcing her to fall a step behind so she couldn't look him in the face. "Just a lot on my mind. Final exams are coming up, you know? Gotta be prepared." He could feel her gaze on the back of his head, laced with a mixture of confusion and hurt. He hated it. He hated the wall he was building between them, brick by painful brick. But what was the alternative? The truth was impossible. A lie was his only shield. The solitude Kasumi had spoken of was no longer a philosophical concept. It was his daily reality. He was surrounded by friends, by people who cared for him, yet he had never felt more profoundly alone. He was a prisoner in his own body, and his own power was the warden. The dreams of Kasumi became more frequent, more intrusive. She was no longer just a specter in a void. She would appear in the periphery of his regular dreams, a silent observer with bored golden eyes. One night, he dreamt he was back at Dagoba Beach, training with all might, but Kasumi was there, sitting on a pile of discarded refrigerators, munching on a slice of pizza she'd seemingly conjured from nowhere. "You look tired," she had commented in his dreamscape, her voice echoing in his mind. "The burden is heavier than you anticipated, isn't it? How do I stop it?" he had pleaded with her dream form. "How do I get rid of it?" She'd taken another slow, deliberate bite of pizza before answering. "You can't. A contract, once made, is absolute. The Geass is a part of your soul now. Like a vital organ. To remove it would be to kill you." She had gestured with the pizza slice. "This is your life now. You can either be crushed under its weight, or you can learn to bear it. I would suggest the latter. It's far more entertaining to watch." her casual cruelty, her framing of his suffering as her personal entertainment, chilled him to the core. She wasn't a guide or a mentor. She was a capricious god, and he was her plaything, but her advice, however callous, was undeniable. He couldn't get rid of the Geass. He had to learn to live with it. He began practicing in secret. Late at night, in the privacy of his dorm room, he would stand before his mirror, the dreaded contact lens removed. He would stare at the faint sigil in his eye and try to exert his will over it. He'd try to force it to fade, to disappear. He'd focus on feelings of calm, of peace, trying to starve the power of the desperation it seemed to feed on. It was useless. The sigil remained, a permanent stain on his iris. Then he tried the opposite. He tried to summon it, to make it glow on command, just as he had with Shinso and Todoroki. He would focus on a command, pouring his will into it. Turn on, he'd think, staring at his lamp. Fall over. He'd command a pencil on his desk. Nothing ever happened. His control over its activation was still non-existent. It was a wild, untamed thing, and his attempts to domesticate it were futile. The only thing these sessions accomplished was to deepen the shadows under his eyes and fray his already shattered nerves. The day of the final practical exams arrived like a death knell. The students of Class 1A stood in their hero costumes before the assembled faculty. Aizawa explained the format. A 2-on-1 battle against one of their teachers. Izuku felt a cold sweat trickle down his back. A real battle. A high-stress situation where desperation was not just possible, but likely. He watched as his classmates were paired off. Yaoyorozu and Todoroki against Aizawa. Uraraka and Aoyama against 13. And then came his name, Midoriya and Bakugo. Aizawa announced, his voice flat. Your opponents. A colossal figure landed behind them with a ground-shaking thump, a cloud of dust billowing out. The familiar, booming laughter echoed through the training ground. Will be me. All Might stood there in his full, magnificent muscle form, his signature smile a terrifying thing to behold when it was aimed at you. Izuku's heart plummeted into his stomach. Bakugo and him teamed up against All Might. It was the worst possible scenario. The tension between him and Bakugo was a constant, simmering friction. Their fighting styles were incompatible. Their personalities were volatile. Forcing them to work together was a recipe for disaster, and their opponent was the one person in the world he was most desperate to prove himself to, and the person he was most terrified of hurting or disappointing. The stress levels were already stratospheric. From the moment the exam started, it was a catastrophe. Don't you dare follow me, Deku! Bakugo snarled, blasting off down a side street of the cityscape training ground. I'll take All Might down myself and get a perfect score! Stay out of my way, you damn nerd! Kaken, wait! We have to work together! Izuku called after him, but it was useless. He was gone. Izuku knew running was the objective. They couldn't hope to beat All Might in a direct fight. But Bakugo's pride would never allow him to simply flee. He would face All Might head-on, and he would lose, and they would both fail. He had to find him. He had to convince him. He found him a few minutes later, embedded in the side of a building. All Might had clearly intercepted him, and it hadn't been a contest. Bakugo was bruised, his gauntlets smoking, but his eyes burned with a furious, unyielding fire. We have to run, Kaken! Izuku pleaded, helping him up. There's an escape gate on the other side of the city. We can't beat him. Shut up! Bakugo roared, shoving him away. I'm not running! I'll never win if I run! I'll kill you, and then I'll kill him! Before they could argue further, a shadow fell over them. All Might stood at the end of the street, his arms crossed, his smile gone, replaced by an expression of grim determination. I am here! He boomed, his voice devoid of its usual heroic cheer. To give you a remedial lesson! He moved. It wasn't a sprint, it was an erasure of distance. One moment he was at the end of the block, the next he was right in front of them, his fist cocked back for a punch. He wasn't using his full power, of course, but the sheer pressure, the wind, the sheer overwhelming presence of the symbol of peace coming at you as an enemy was enough to paralyze the soul. Bakugo, to his credit, reacted instantly, letting off a massive explosion to propel himself backward. Izuku, using full cowling, dodged in the other direction. The street between them was pulverized. The next few minutes were a blur of panicked survival. All Might was a force of nature, hurting them, toying with them. He was demonstrating the vast, immeasurable gap between them and the number one hero. Every plan Izuku tried to formulate was instantly dismantled. Every attack Bakugo launched was swatted away like a fly. They were backed into a dead-end alley, the same kind of alley where he had faced Stain. The irony was not lost on him. All Might blocked the only exit, a monolithic wall of muscle and power. "It's over," All Might said, his voice a low rumble. "Will you surrender, or must I incapacitate you?" Bakugo was panting, his body trembling with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. "Never!" he gasped. Izuku's mind was racing, sifting through 1,000 desperate, failing scenarios. There was no way out. They were too slow, too weak. Bakugo's refusal to cooperate had doomed them from the start. And then, the whisper. The cold, seductive logic of the Geass. "He won't listen to you," the thought coiled in his mind. "His pride is too great. But you can make him. You can save you both. Just one look. One simple, logical command, work with me." The temptation was insidious. It wasn't born of a desperate need to survive, but of a cold, tactical logic. It would be the most efficient path to victory. He could command Bakugo to follow his plan. They could create a distraction, and one of them could slip past to the gate. They would pass the exam. It would be a perfect, rational use of his power. A tool used for the greater good. He looked at Bakugo. The explosive boy was gearing up for one last, suicidal charge. His eyes, burning with defiance, met Izuku's. The heat in his left eye flared instantly, a familiar surge of power responding to his burgeoning will. The world began to tint with crimson. The sigil wanted to bloom. This was it. He could end this. He could force the outcome he wanted, and then he saw it. In Bakugo's furious, hate-filled eyes, beneath all the rage and the pride, he saw a flicker of something else, fear. Not just fear of All Might, but the fear of being surpassed. The fear of being left behind by the person he had bullied and looked down on his entire life. His pride, his rage, it was all a defense mechanism, a shield for a deeply rooted insecurity. If Izuku used Geass on him, he would be doing the very thing Bakugo had always accused him of, looking down on him. He would be saying, in the most profound way possible, "Your will doesn't matter. Your feelings don't matter. Only my plan matters." He would be breaking him, not just for this exam, but possibly forever. He would be taking his rival, the person who drove him to be better, and turning him into a puppet. He would be no better than Shinso. No, he would be worse. Because he would be doing it consciously, calculatingly, to someone he had known his entire life. No, the rejection was so absolute, so powerful, it felt like a physical blow. He wrenched his gaze away from Bakugo, squeezing his eyes shut. The crimson tint faded. The heat in his eyes subsided, leaving a cold, clammy sweat on his skin. He would rather fail this exam. He would rather be expelled from UA than do that to Kaken. He had to earn his trust. He had to win this battle not just against All Might, but against the darkness within himself. He opened his eyes and did the only thing he could think of. He turned his back on Bakugo and charged, not at All Might, but away from the exit. "Deku, what the hell are you doing?" Bakugo screamed. "There's no way to win by fighting." Izuku yelled back, his mind finally clear. "So we have to run. And you won't run. So I'll make you." Before Bakugo could react, Izuku spun around, cocked his fist back, a full power, 100% smash, and punched Bakugo square in the jaw. The punch wasn't meant to injure. It was a statement. A desperate, painful plea. But as Bakugo flew back, stunned and enraged, Izuku was already moving, launching himself directly at All Might. It was a suicidal move, and they both knew it. But it was also a distraction. All Might, surprised by his student's apparent self-destruction, was forced to focus on him. And in that split second of hesitation, Bakugo understood. He saw Deku, the worthless, quirkless pebble, willingly sacrificing himself to create an opening for him. It was an act so contrary to everything he believed about Deku that it shattered his pride-fueled rage. With a roar that was part fury and part something else, something closer to respect, Bakugo unleashed the biggest explosion he could muster, not as an attack, but as a diversion, a smokescreen. It was all the time Izuku needed. He grabbed the unconscious Bakugo, threw him over his shoulder, and with the last of his strength, bolted for the escape gate. He collapsed just past the finish line, his body broken and spent, but his spirit soaring. They had passed. He had faced the ultimate temptation, the logical, easy path offered by his curse, and he had rejected it. He had chosen the harder path. The heroic path. But the close call had left a deep and lasting scar on his soul. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. Later, in the infirmary, as he lay next to a silent, contemplative Bakugo, Uraraka came to visit. She brought him an apple, her face a mixture of relief and her now familiar worry. "You were amazing, Deku-kun," she said, her voice soft. "But you really scared me. You always seem to be carrying so much weight on your shoulders." She sat on the chair next to his bed, her presence a warm, comforting balm. She started talking about her own exam, about her day, her voice light and cheerful. Izuku listened, a small, genuine smile on his face. For a moment, the fear receded. For a moment he felt normal, and then it happened. He turned to thank her for the apple, his heart feeling lighter than it had in weeks. In that unguarded moment of genuine affection, he forgot. He forgot the contact lens, the constant vigilance, the ever-present danger. He looked her right in the eye. Her warm, brown eyes were so full of kindness. And his curse, the insidious power that was now permanently active, lashed out. It didn't respond to a conscious command, but to the deepest, most selfish desire buried beneath his heroic exterior, his desperate wish to stop being a source of pain and worry for the people he cared about. The heat flared in his left eye. The world did not tint red, there was no dramatic flare. It was a subtle, silent activation. He felt the cold energy flow from him to her, a psychic connection forged and broken in the space of a heartbeat. And he realized, with a lurch of pure, ice-cold horror, what he had just wished. What he had just commanded. "Don't ever worry about me." Uraraka blinked. Her expression, which had been soft with concern, suddenly went placid. The worry vanished from her face, replaced by a serene, almost blank cheerfulness. "You're right, Deku-kun," she said, her smile bright and unwavering. "You're strong. There's no need to worry about you at all. Anyway, I should get going. Gotta train for summer camp." She stood up, gave him a cheerful wave, and walked out of the infirmary without a backward glance. The warmth and concern that had defined her presence was gone, replaced by a hollow, manufactured optimism. Izuku stared at the empty doorway, his blood turning to ice in his veins. He had done it. He had accidentally branded his friend's soul. He had taken her empathy, her kindness, one of the most beautiful things about her, and had muted it with a selfish, cowardly command. He squeezed his eyes shut, but he couldn't block out the image of her empty smile. The physical pain of his broken bones was nothing compared to the agony that now ripped through his soul. This was the true nature of the runaway curse. Not the grand, dramatic moments of life and death, but the small, quiet, intimate moments of carelessness. He had just irrevocably damaged one of his most precious friendships, and she would never even know it. The solitude was no longer a cage he was building for himself. It was a poison he was now leaking into the world, corrupting everyone he held dear.